Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Property and Investor podcast. This is the podcast when I speak to some of the most interesting, inspiring, resilient people in property investing and beyond. I, of course, am your host, Paul Lanfear. Now, as you know, my inner lawyer always has to say something. My inner lawyer has to say nothing that we discuss today is health advice, financial advice, legal advice. Obviously, seek your own professional advice as required. And I am thrilled, and then the time of this podcast could not be any better to introduce my guest today. So my guest today is Richard Little, who I've known for many, many years. I'm not even going to guess the number of years that I've known Richard for. So he has been working in the property, land, construction and development space for almost 5 decades. Yes, almost 50 years. So that tells you the depth of experience that we're going to benefit from today. He has worked in all kinds of aspects of residential development, complex conversions, new builds, and we are going to get into some of that as we progress. People familiar with the property space will recognize his name. He's well published in all of the industry publications. He's a very accomplished speaker and has shared his wisdom and experience with many of us through the years. He has a reputation for being ruthless in the scrutiny of his deals, and his focus now is on sort of land acquisition, joint ventures, and managing opportunities as they present themselves in this environment. I think the time in the podcast cannot be any better, as I hope you'll see in the next sort of 60 minutes or so. Richard, very, very warm welcome to the podcast, my friend. Thank you very much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure, Paul.
Now, I like to think that I've evolved as a human being, so I don't experience much envy anymore. But when it comes to your beard, Richard, and I appreciate people listening to the podcast, I'm going to see this, but when it comes to your beard, Richard, I have to say deep levels of envy. That's a pretty spectacular beard you're rocking there. So if you are listening to the podcast, check out the social media posts, because then you will see Richard's beard. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well, sir. It's really good to touch base with you again.
Fantastic. So, as I say, I think the time of this podcast is pretty much perfect. I want to start in the usual place where we normally start, Richard, which is people's origin stories. The primary reason for starting with people's origin stories is I think context is important. I think the context from which people come is a really valuable thing for the listener, because then you can understand, the reasons why people are expressing the views they can. And you have a fascinating origin story with highs and lows. I think we'd get a lot of value from understanding a bit more about that, particularly in the current circumstances. So I'm going to pause for breath and hand over to you. Take us right back to the beginning. Like, don't be shy of that. Like, literally, where were you born? Who your parents were? How did you get into this industry?
Okay, right, yeah. So I was born in Hitchin, Hertfordshire, in 1958 or so. Yeah, no, it was 1958, and I was an only child. My parents, Tony and Daphne, and unfortunately, father's no longer with us, but my mother is fortunate enough to have her living in our house, or part of the house anyway. We've got two. Unusually, we've got two granny flats, as they say, on the ground floor. So I have mother in one and mother-in-law in the other. So anyway, that is that's not the origin. That's got to the end already. So I was fortunate enough in many ways to be born into a business family. I used to say it was a construction family, but my dad had his fingers in all sorts of pies. He was an early Del boy, if you like, without the next year I'm going to be a millionaire, because that wasn't ever a focus for him. It was always what we're doing now, not what we're doing next. It's what we're doing now. So I was brought up with construction and business, and I sort of wanted to make my own path once I was sort of leaving school. And did that for about 2 years, and then realized that actually no, I did want to go back into construction, or wanted to go into construction. So father, as I then did later on, is he started his child on site, working, getting to understand, what a brick is, what cement is, what all the materials are, all the process, and it's a great way for somebody to understand the industry is build a house or be part of building a house, even if it's labouring, because you can learn so much. And so it was a construction business. I suppose we would label it different now. We were house builders, I suppose. We built an awful lot of houses over the years, and some for ourselves, some as what we would now call joint ventures, but at that time didn't really have a name. You just struck a deal, with what would possibly be seen a competing competitor in the same area. Lots of stuff still goes on now within our sector. I suppose it does other sectors where there's a lot of behind the scenes collaboration that goes on. I mean, people will understand it probably with the big house builders, the volume house builders. They're talking all the time. It doesn't mean to say that they always agree, and there's some pretty sharp practices that go on, but it was no different really at a very, very low level. So buying a piece of land locally, as a for instance, we might buy a piece of land, and as is the case now, we might not have enough money, but John up the road, who's also a house builder, he just happens to have sold all this and he's got some money. So he would, without having any names anywhere, he would back our own project, as we would with his if we had surplus money. And he was buying land. But to anybody on the outside, we're competitors. But actually not really the case. And I guess there were certain times where there were discussions taking place when we were buying land that obviously well, we're not going to bid on it because you're bidding on it, that sort of thing. And yes, we probably know that goes on even more so now. But over the years, as I say, we've built a lot of houses and quite a few conversion projects. Learned a lot, but mostly learned from those projects that didn't go quite well. And the projects that didn't go well, I mean financially well, because every project has its challenges, from actually getting the project logistical, etc., and legally and paperwork and everything else. Every project has its challenges, but ultimately we judge it on the financial success, short term or long term. So we got ourselves into some situations where we were overextended, I suppose, overexposed. All our money was in one project, because you didn't like to borrow too much, although there was plenty of money around. So we got ourselves into a sort of situation where we were exposed to the market. And that's probably one of my biggest lessons over the years, and something that we're very, very careful of now, not getting overexposed to the market. And it's difficult to manage that process. And we talk to investors, we talk to fellow house builders, developers, all the time, and we see in others how we would consider they are so overexposed, but they either are unaware, they just don't know, they're perhaps a little naive in many ways, or it's just a case of we just become very cautious over the years and not really sure. But the story over the almost, as you quite rightly say, almost 5 decades is a roller coaster. So quite a lot of ups, quite a lot of downs, and that's not all financial, but obviously again we measure stuff on the financial success, and we are measured by financial success as well by others, rightly or wrongly, and I think over a period of time, the mistakes that you make in projects and people, so it's not always the projects themselves, sometimes it's the wrong people, it's often the wrong people, the wrong match of people possibly that comes together for a project. But ultimately in the sector we're in, it's the market that dictates the element of risk, I suppose. So it's been a long, very, very enjoyable 50 years or nearly 50 years. I don't know anything else, which some people will find quite sad, but I don't really want to know. I don't really have hobbies or anything like that. As my son Bryn would say, if he wants to do something for a change, he'll just do a different project, which I will do, because this is different projects. It's completely different because it's working with different people. So that's like a holiday really in many ways. It's a break. Change is as good as a rest, I think my dad used to say. So as you go through those years and you go through the cycles, the economic cycles, if you like, the political cycles, the cycles of life and everything else, you learn a lot. But the one thing that I think that I maintain now, which I think is a great advantage, is that there's still an awful lot to learn, and you can learn from people that know much, much less than you do. You do not always learn from people that know everything. Sometimes we learn from people that know nothing. Anyway, that's hopefully that's the backstory.
Yeah, that set the scene very nicely. So listening to you, I get the sense that your late father played a really important role in kind of your evolution as a human being. Do you want to just hover on that for a minute and just tell us a little bit about what role you feel your father had in terms of your direction of travel and where you are now?
Yeah, I think absolutely he did, and I think I'd be, I think I'd hold my hands up to sort of say for the first, I don't know, the first 10 years of my working life, until I got into my 30s, I probably didn't realise how he was steering me. I probably was young enough and had a big enough ego that thought everything that was happening during my 20s and probably my 30s was because I was either brilliant or useless. And so I didn't really. So he was always somebody that was, he was always there, but he let you go. He let me make my own mistakes. But probably now I look back, because I'm sort of repeating the process, I suppose, as long as Bryn's not listening to this. No, he does know. Is I'm trying to do the same thing with Bryn, the son, is sort of let him make some mistakes, but obviously not let him make too many big ones. And I think it's so I'm trying to replicate that, because I think, and it was only in the last sort of 20 years or so that I realized how much of an influence that my dad made, how much of an impact he made on how I was, how I thought, and how I think now. And I can't replicate him, because he was, as most people say about their own fathers, and he was, or one of a kind, but he was an extremely content person. He goes against what a lot of people would say. If you're, you've got to be ambitious to succeed. And I sort of get that, but actually your ambition doesn't have to be out front and up front. Your ambition can be inside you. You don't have to talk about it all the time. You don't have to say, I am going to, manifest this and all this sort of stuff. He never did that. He was saying he used to say he's happy with his lot. He used to say things like that a lot. He'd do a nice lot. I'm happy with my lot. And he was genuinely content person, and he wanted for nothing. And that's largely because he didn't want a lot of material stuff anyway. And I quite like things, but I think for my own benefit and the family's benefit, I sort of followed in his footsteps. I'm not that fussed. I've had stuff. I've had a lot more stuff than he had. Thing stuff, and yeah, you have it, and yeah, there are things that maybe people really, really crave and they get. But most of the things I've had, because well, I'll give it a try. You have a fancy car or whatever, and then you realise. Nah. So I always look for value out of everything.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, it's kind of quite aligned with like the teachings of the Stoics. They talk about contentment comes from the fact of wanting less, and looking at the things we want and really considering why we want them, what value they bring, and that freedom in all of its many definitions is the easiest way to freedom is to seek less. For example, in the material world, and you can be spiritually, intellectually, physically, emotionally free via that path quicker than you can doing the opposite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think stoicism is undervalued by a lot of people, dismissed, because they lots of people largely see it as always negative.
Mhm.
And I can see that. I can see why if you don't get it, that's how you would see it. But actually, in many ways, it's a path to yeah, quite a pleasant life.
Mhm. So what I'd like to do is, I mean, there's so much we could already unpack in there, but what I think would be really useful is you've talked about cycles, and we know that there are all kinds of different cycles in life, but a predominant one which we can all easily digest is the economic cycle of peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
So let's do the good news first of all. Okay, so so obviously, I mean, even with my simple maths, I can work out that you were around in the 90s. So you obviously saw what happened in the property market in the 90s, the high and the low. And again, my simple maths tells me you were around in like 2008, 2009. So you had the peak and your trough there. So we had two.
Yeah.
If we can use those as our kind of case studies, if you like, because I think it's really important for people to understand what the good times look like as well, because the good times lead to the bad times in a way, don't they? So
Absolutely.
tell us what it was like, in the kind of peak periods, where everything seemed to be going to plan, where everything so these are my words, and you're welcome to disagree with them, but like if you've ever had a moment where you thought everything you touched was turning to gold, this was going to go on forever, tell us about those really good times. What were they like? What was going on? What were you thinking? What were you involved in? So tell us about those like peak moments.
Okay, so yeah, so that's I often hark back to the late 80s and early 90s, which I see a lot of people of my age going on about, and we talk about the high interest rates and all that sort of stuff. I'll come back to that, but largely those people that bang on about it, I think I just got a chip on the shoulder about it. And anyway, that's by the way. So yeah, during the late 80s, it was easy, because you could get land. So we mostly build new houses, as we've established. You could buy land fairly easy. There wasn't as much competition as there is now, so it was more of a buyer's market, regardless of what the economy was doing. Because if you're a landowner and you got a piece of land, there's probably 4 or 5 people that might buy your acre of land. Now, if you had 100 acres, that was different. There was a different 4 or 5 people, but it was still only, you get the point. There wasn't so many as there wasn't so much competition, so it was quite easy, and it was finding sites was fairly straightforward, and getting them at reasonable prices. I can look back and I can change it because it's my story, and I can make it sound like it was as tough then as it is now, but it wasn't. It was way easier. So yeah, you get your land, you get your planning. It's never been easy planning, not when you're doing multiple units or any projects these days, I'm afraid. So it's never been easy, but it was easier. And it wasn't just a case of, as people often talk about, the brown paper envelope and all that sort of stuff. Yes, that absolutely did go on, and I suspect it still goes on to a degree now. But yeah, that's it's still in the minority. So we were getting sites, fairly easily, and money was simple. So just to give you an idea. So I remember it would have been probably mid 80s, I suppose. By that point, I'd built my own house, brought a garden plot for, I might have got the numbers wrong, but roughly I brought the plot for about 10 grand, and I built it for about 10 grand. And then it was worth within a couple of years, it was worth 125, something like that. That was just a boom. Yeah, that was just nothing I did. I built a house which cost me 20, it was probably worth about 30 once I built it, but then prices went up. But at that time, we could borrow. So we both had houses, no mortgages. That's my father and I. So we both had houses worth in excess of 100,000 or whatever, so reasonable thing. We could borrow £15 for every pound value that we got in our house. Yeah. But there was no valuations. it was just self-certifying that we got £100,000 of equity. Didn't even know that's what the word was in them days, but yeah, what is now. So we got £200,000 of equity, so we could borrow £3 million. Now that's still quite a sum now, but if you can go back to the late 80s, £3 million. Now, my dad has already said, I probably, if left to my own devices, I probably would have borrowed that £3 million and would have lost even more money. But we didn't do that. But there were an awful lot of people around. Money was so easy to get. And so then we saw lots of people, certainly as the 80s crept into the 90s and the crash and everything else. We saw two people that we knew that they took their own lives because they were in such a financial mess. One was an electrical contractor and one was ground worker. Because they were able to borrow so much money, and like ourselves, they weren't educated in business. What we learned and what my dad knew about business, we knew a bit, but we only knew it at a certain level. We didn't know how quickly things could go wrong and how quick the banks can turn, particularly, and there's no particular, we were with Lloyd's Bank at the time. All the money was done through, as it was in them years, it was with the bank manager, and he had quite a sort of, a high amount he could lend, etc. So all that was done, and it wasn't done on, he might come out in his car and come to site and stop and wind the window down, and say, "Oh, morning guys, just checking that you are building a house on this site that you told us." It was all very laid back, very relaxed in many ways. But of course, when things didn't go well, all of a sudden it's bang, gone. So I mean, we had money taken out of, we had business accounts, but when things did go wrong in the late 80s, we had money taken out of our personal accounts and everything, and they weren't entitled to do that once we talked to the legals, but they did it. And what are you going to do about it? And what we're actually going to say is, so there was lots of opportunities in the 80s and 90s, lots of opportunities, and you couldn't fail to make money until it all went wrong. And then so what we saw is what lots of people have the memory of: very, very wealthy property developers, if you like, driving around in their Ferraris. Oh, this has been repeated probably, but we had it then. And all of a sudden they ain't got a Ferrari anymore, and they ain't got anywhere to live, and they ain't got that because it was all taken away from them. Now,
and for those of us that weren't around in the 90s actively doing this, so what was the catalyst from the apparent, unlimited amount of leverage and money and opportunity? What was the catalyst which turned the market that led to the collapse in that decade?
Yeah, I think there was a number of things, but there was the ERM. There was all sorts of financial and political sort of things that happened, and those of us that were around at the time that weren't particularly active would say it was the Margaret Thatcher years that some people bang on about, say how fantastic they are, but for an awful lot of people that started the rot. It started, it started the divisiveness, I suppose, that we see these days, politically, and so it was a lot of economic decisions by government, shall we say, and not just our governments, but other governments that made the financial markets just, sort of basically implode. So us as we're like we are now, possibly we're all pawns. It's just some of us think we're better positioned. You're all better positioned until it goes wrong, and then you realize the power that these other people really have. So really it started in the late 80s, where there was so much the house inflation went up so much. People used to talk, it was the days of the yuppies, it was the days of, oh, my house went up, £1,000 last month, I mean, that's what they used to talk about in the pubs and the then wine bars that were coming out, and it was, and I think it was this sort of position that people were put in. The ordinary folk like ourselves were, and the family were, oh, you can be homeowners, You know, you can be, and so we started selling off the council houses and you know, all that sort of stuff, which, you know, we're probably, some people would be ruin that now, but so it was much more without being political, what can I say? I think it was you have to say it was political that sort of started it, but then of course we started getting all the bad debt, so it was easy to get a mortgage. You could get a mortgage for well, like we were saying, borrowing £15 to every pound of equity that we said we mortgages were just as easy to get. You know, you could say, well, okay, yeah, I'm self-employed. It's harder now if you're self-employed to get a mortgage, isn't it? But then them days you could say, yeah, I earned £8,000 last year or whatever. Give me a mortgage for, you know, 50 grand or whatever, and you go out and buy a house for 40 grand. You know, it was that, you know, was too much money. Give too much money to people that don't know how to manage that money, and you're going to get chaos.
Yeah.
Not, you know,
what we'll probably recognize is there are themes that re-emerge,
absolutely,
later in time. Just hovering over, so we see the peak, we see the crash, and without, Richard, I don't wish to invade your privacy, so you take this as you wish. It's like, so how bad did it get? In terms of like, did you lose your home? Did you lose everything? Did you
yeah, we did. Yeah. We had I personally had a High Court judgment. People talk about CCJs. I have a HCJ, which you may well be aware of with your legal hat on, but lots of people aren't. So I had a High Court judgment that was obviously all led by Lloyds Bank. It took about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years probably for it all to sort of unwind. You know, decisions were taken. We lived in a 26, 27 room, what people would call a mansion these days. I think you might have seen a picture of it in the past, I don't know, but it was quite a grand looking house. And we led the life of horses and stuff like that. So which was great, but we were still, I'm still I consider myself an ordinary man. Doesn't matter what car I drive or whatever else. I'm an ordinary man inside, a common man, I suppose. And what happened was that the bank said, right, we're taking the house. Well, okay, you take the house. So you're in survival mode then. So because we're all in on a particular project, so everything is all gone in, all our own cash has gone in. Prior to that, we got cash in the bank, and we were getting I think it was over 10% return on our money in the bank, and we were living off of that money for a couple of years. And lived very, very well off of that money. But what wasn't probably smart enough, I think it's fair to say, well, actually, yeah, this is going to end well. But nobody was. It was a gravy train. Everybody seemed to be on the gravy train, and yeah, it's never going to end. So yes, it repeats.
And were you forced down the road of like bankruptcy, or were you able to avoid bankruptcy by satisfying the judgment?
Yeah, so no, so we weren't made bankrupt. What we did was I made sure that everybody was paid except for Lloyds Bank and HMRC. And I was happy with them taking that debt, whether that's right or not. But everybody else, the news agent, the carpenter, the electrician, we made sure we paid all of those. So we sold off all assets, other assets we had, got the cash. What's the saying? Cash is king. It certainly was then, because everybody wanted cash. They didn't want. They just wanted the notes, as it were. But I suppose they never made us bankrupt because there was no point. And there were so many people like us. I guess it was a case of, I mean, I don't really know, but I guess at one point, in that revenue, whatever, they just wiped it off. And Lloyds Bank, within a year of a High Court judgment that was instigated by Lloyds Bank, I was sitting in a Lloyds Bank office, and they were offering to lend us money.
Wow, that is a quick turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's a quick turnaround.
Yeah. We just happened to know, and it is about people, in this business. We just happened to know somebody that was well placed in Lloyds Bank and in Bristol for whatever reasons. Our particular bank was managed 200 miles away by a Bristol regional office or something or other. And she said that they just had bags and bags and bags of unopened mail that was all to do with businesses like ours, that as far as in her experience, they never opened. They just drew the line under thing, because they wouldn't tell us when they'd released us from a charge, effectively, what we call now a floating charge, I suppose. They wouldn't. The only way we could do it is by applying for credit. So I applied for a mobile phone. And that was the thing that says it'd be, because whatever it was, they had to write it off before they could write it off against their tax, I suppose. So they had to discharge the debt, effectively, you know, and they did that, but they weren't going to tell you. So so I applied for a mobile phone and a credit account and got it, which meant they effectively had released us. So from that point forward, you're clear again.
Yeah, and then how did you? Let's span the gap then from like, so how did you rebuild off that base and then take us and then transition, if you can, into, you know, the other peak, the like you know, 27, 28, which I think, you know, listening to you, I can hear echoes of already, and it'd be interesting, you know, to hear your sentiments on it. So how did you rebuild and then take us back into kind of the euphoria of the 2007, 2008?
Yeah, it sort of it does bash you a bit, so you sort of take a bit of a bruising, and it's sort of right, okay. So at that particular point, I was sort of living on benefits, you know. So I thought, right, okay, you know, which doesn't go down well. So it's right, okay. And I'm one of the benefits of being learning to use your hands with the trade is you can normally go out and find a bit of work. So I could do some bits and pieces, and I was doing bits and pieces for cash and things like that, you know. And I thought, well, actually, this is a good time to go to university and to at last prove to myself how clever I am, or not, as the case might be, because I discovered that I could go to university and they give me more money. So it was using the system, it was understanding. So it's all about timing, and so that was bad timing from the economy, and we went down. Yes, it was mainly for the economy, but I would still maintain, as my dad always taught me, is you know, you take ownership of everything that goes wrong, and you share ownership of everything that goes right. So you share, when it's good, you share it with those around you that have helped you make it good, but when it's bad, you take it. You do not share that. So it might be, we could sort of blame Margaret Thatcher and, you know, or whatever, you know, we could blame that to say, well, that's why the economy, you know, tanked, like we see now, like we saw in the noughties and stuff like that. It's always about blaming somebody else, you know. And actually, that probably is the core reason, but actually it's much better as a person to sort of say, take ownership. So I sort of thought, right, okay, I've always been good at playing a system, I suppose, or finding out what the system is and where the angles are, which is probably comes from my dad, you know, without crossing the line. Well, bending it, but, you know, without sort of, you know, occasionally it snaps, so you have to sort of do a quick repair and get back in again. But, you know, so pushing the boundary where you can. So I went to university, and I took the easy option. I did I can't remember what it's called, an access course or something or other, and I quite fancied doing economics and maths and things, and sort of conversation we had previously about your daughter. So that's you know, that's interested in math, you know, but it was too hard. It was like, right, actually, I quite like it because it's something I've always wanted to do, but I thought, well, you know, university is going to be a lot easier because I've got 3 kids and they're relatively young, and, you know, and by then, you know, we're sort of, you know, we're renting a farmhouse somewhere, and so there are some bills, although you're getting, you know, some benefits. You know, that you've got to sort of, you've got to do something else to get a little bit more, just to sort of live, you know, a little bit better, perhaps. So, you know, it was really a case of, you know, if I can go to university, then okay, I need to make it as easy as I can. So what I did is I did a building surveying degree, and pretty much everything in that degree I'd already done. You know, that's not quite true. I don't want to sort of underestimate or do down anybody that's done a building surveying degree, but let's put it this way: I found it fairly easy. you know, and because if I didn't know, I knew somebody that did, you know, that sort of things, you know, if I worked there. So at that time, we thought, right, okay, I was lodging away in the week, just to stop the traveling and stuff like that. And the people where I was lodging, they wanted an extension. So I thought, oh, there's an opportunity while I'm here. I'll get some free lodging. And I put together, because I was on a building, we had construction management and all that. Had loads of trades within the other with the fellow classmates and stuff. And so we put together a team and we started building. So we built for people through the 3 years. So because they all wanted money. And university, you know, at the time, I'm sure it's much harder now, but at the time it was like 12 hours a week. You know, it was like a part-time job, even with the coursework and all that. You know, maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but you know, it wasn't a full-time job. So you could have at least another part-time job and still find time for a family, you know. So yeah, so I spent the time, I suppose, you started, you know, back to contracting, back to your roots, back to where you can earn money, organizing people, you know, so getting the work, you know, spotting the opportunity, you know, getting all the paperwork sorted out. And it's the same process, whether it's an extension for somebody or 100 units. It is the same process. Yes, we deal with more people probably and it takes longer, but it's the same process. You still got to find the opportunity, put the deal together, get all the paperwork done, you know, mobilize everybody and get the project completed and obviously, you know, exited in some way. So over, you know, in between the sort of 90s and, you know, the next decade and a half, it was about finding opportunities, exactly that, finding people to do them and using other people's money. Which I now know is called other people's money. Before it just used to be called family money. But wider family. The core money that all went. But you might lose your money. You might lose all of your, you know, your stuff, but you don't lose what's in your heart and in your head. And if you've got a bit of support around you, mostly coming from within, but if you've got what it takes, you will come again. And I'm sure some of the people that you've had on your podcast, you know, a lot of them have seen the low, and the depth of the low often dictates how high the next high is going to be, because you start choosing. Some people really suffer, and they say, I'm going to shoot for the, you know, the moon and beyond. And other people, and that might work for them. And other people, like myself, probably thought, well, actually, I don't want to get exposed like that again. So I will shoot for a height, and then we'll see how we go. So it was, you know, it wasn't a limitless ambition. It was a case of, right, okay, it's constant, right? How are we doing? How are we, you know, are we overexposed? Do we owe one party too much money? You know, which was one of our issues. If we didn't owe, you know, however £1 million to Lloyd's Bank, and we owed it to 4, it would have been different. Would it have been easier? Not necessarily. It would have probably taken longer to sort out. So, but the fall wouldn't have been quite so quick. Not like overnight.
And that's something that you do hear, you know, from the 2008 period as well, is that people were all in with one particular lender, and that they were calling in loans that were functioning, performing loans, just because the loan to value covenant had been breached. And, you know, no level of negotiation was talking these institutional lenders into seeing sense. You know, well, I'm paying the debt, you know, we're all good to go, we just need to weather this storm like we would have done, you know, we've always done. But for reasons we won't go into, you know, the lenders just wanted all their money back because they were, you know, you know, their appetite for risk suddenly disappeared overnight. But let's go into that sort of chapter of life. So you've built, you kind of rebuild building, and then, you know, let's talk about that run from like the early 2000s up to 2007, 2008. Because when I listen to people who have had that experience, and I try and recount it to people in the breakfast group that I have, it's all, I'm sure people do believe me, but I understand why they find it so incredible. Like some of the sentiment around that time, that this was going to go on forever, that if you didn't buy this property today, it would be worth even more tomorrow, and you would be priced out of the market forever. You know, those sentiments sound extraordinary, but from listening very carefully to people who've ridden that rodeo, those are some of the sentiments they've shared with me, is that we just believed that this was it. You know, that if you weren't on the horse, you were never getting, if you didn't get on this next horse, you weren't going to have a horse to ride. So tell us about that transition from, you know, you've rebuilt, and now take us into the kind of that euphoric period that led to 2007, 2008, 2009.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was a spectator
Right
period, because we were not overexposed in any way because of the previous bruising, and we did learn. You know, when I say we, I learned a lot, and my dad was getting older and effectively retired, if you like. He was probably my age now, I suppose, at that period. In fact, he was a bit older, so he wasn't really doing too much. He wasn't things. So we weren't chasing. We weren't, you know, we weren't shooting into orbit. We weren't, you know, we were just being comfortable, just doing, you know, projects that came along that were comfortable. There was a margin, you know, and there was an out, and we weren't overexposed on borrowings. So we in fact, pretty much the only monies we had at that period were family's money and other people that were like family, that, you know, that we'd known for many years. And it's quite interesting, even when people have lost money with you, they can believe and they will come back. Not always, but they do. So, you know, we've got one family investor now that's been with us, you know, with my dad before me, sort of thing, and lost some money and made some money and all that. But, you know, they believe in you, you know, and if you say you're doing, and that's an amazing thing. It's a big responsibility, but it's an amazing thing. So we weren't, you know, as we watched the whole sort of, you know, noughties sort of decade sort of coming to a close, and sort of thing, that, you know, God, you know, what's happening here? It's pretty much the same, different circumstances, globally, financially, different things and different catalysts, etc. But the same things happening to people. But the difference was then, and then even more so now, is the amount of information that we are subject to now through, I guess, all social media and all the different platforms. Is almost the case of and it was then, is, well, okay, this information, I think it was still more believed then than it is now, but bit more skeptical now about some of the stuff we see and hear. But there was information coming through, so people had more information, and they did truly believe that, yeah, that, like you said, you know, this is going to keep on going. We've got to get in. But we saw the same thing happen that had happened to us, is the financial institutions, as you alluded to, just pull the plug, you know, and I understand why they do that, because they're so big that they haven't got the flexibility. They can't be understanding, because don't work like that. Because how do you put write the criteria down for being understanding? The only way you do that is putting responsibility onto people, and that's not how big business was, and I guess it still isn't now. You know, it's moved away from that. You know, so you know, so we saw lots of car crashes with people that held significant portfolios. We've never held anything. We dabbled in the last few years, but nothing really much. So, you know, all the units we've ever built were sold, and I would continue to do that now. I would not hold. That's a whole new podcast, the whole thing. But that doesn't agree with the family. So the family, as I'm sort of handing over reins, I've got to go with, yeah, okay, if they want to hold some stuff, then I'm happy to listen and do that. But personally, I wouldn't hold anything. You know, that's another conversation for another day, probably. But it's a debate I'd like to have with some of these sort of investors, that even the investors that have been in the market 20, 30 years. But anyway, that's by the way. I saw too many people that were over leveraged. In the noughties, and because they didn't see, we've got to keep going, and we saw people with hundreds of houses go, hundreds of houses, simply because maybe they were a little lazy, maybe business wise. And I think this is another thing that probably we see improvements to now is, property itself. It's not just property. It is a business. You need to treat it as a business. And there's so much naivety around business in people that have got lots of property and develop lots of property. And, and nice enough people, and not sort of bashing them, but you just think, you don't really know. You just think that things are never going to be any different. And you think that your lender is your best friend, because they might say that when they're lending you the money. Your lender, whoever lends you the money, is not your best friend, because when it comes down to it, they will revert to what they've got to do and pull the plug. Yeah, all right. If you've got individual investors, equity investors, that is different. But certainly, any institutional, lending is no different now. They will.
And I think that's a beautiful nugget to hover over, is that sentiment of, like, the way things are now is not necessarily the way things will be in the future. I mean, that is a kind of mantra that we should all be saying to ourselves, particularly I think in the good times as well. The way things are now is not the way they'll be in the future. And just to have that awareness that things do change, as we have certainly seen. The last 5 years have been pretty crazy, haven't they? With everything that's happened. If we were to go back and you and I were like sitting down and you were to recount to me some of the things that were going to happen in that 5-year period, I would say, Richard, you've lost your mind, my friend. I'm afraid you're delusional. No one's going to seek to lock me in my house, and all the rest of it. Like, we just wouldn't believe it, would we? So let's transition to the current day. So I think we've really laid some solid foundations there. So in terms of the current day, one of the purposes of this series of podcasts, called the Macro View, is that we are bombarded with so much information, and I almost think for people what they don't need any more information. And I think some of us, I include myself in this, we seek to create certainty in the world by gathering yet more and more information. And actually, maybe that's not the solution. Maybe we don't need more information. Maybe we need to understand our landscape a little bit better. So let's take a big step back and a big kind of pause and breath. Give us your take, given the foundations you've given us, give us your experience. What do you make of the current market now? Where do you think we're heading? What's your big picture take on the current day, Richard?
Well, like most people that do predictions, we're always wrong. And that's the only sure prediction, isn't it? Whatever we say is going to be wrong. But yeah, look, I think what we are seeing, and this won't change. We are seeing increased legislation, shall we say, increased input from, we'll call it, third parties in the whole property sector. More and more people for pushing for more and more legislation, and more, so it's probably going to get much tougher for the smaller landlord, the smaller investor, developer sort of thing. It is probably going to get tougher. Doesn't mean to say there aren't little niches that people can explore, but what I see is what I'm seeing now is a similar lemon approach that I've seen before. Everybody's right, get out of buy-to-let, get out of HMOs, all of this sort of, get out of this, and then they're, commercial's the new big thing. Really? Why? Because it's different, that's all. Yes, there are some benefits of commercial. I'm not saying there isn't, and it makes sense for people that are holding portfolios to sort of spread some of that risk. So, but I it's not everything. Don't get rid of everything and go in commercial. So that it's all, don't be all in on anything, because I've done that. Don't work. Don't matter, I mean, I don't know whether you've still got them, but you had some super HMOs. I'm guessing you've still got some of those. And when people sort of said, really good quality HMOs, I've seen some of these really good quality HMOs. People think are really good quality, and guess what, people? They're not. Well, I think we saw one of yours, and it was really, really good. So I'm hoping the rest are the same standard.
Yeah, and I think over the last 5 years, we've really diversified as well. So we've got a broad range of assets and broad range of tenant clients, and we've really spread out the risk. Because as you know, I'm having this midlife crisis. I've taken up surfing, and there's so many lessons from surfing, but like obviously one of the big ones is like it is really important to catch the wave, but it's as equally as important to get off the wave before you hit the rocks. Like, you know, and when you've done this physically, you know what it means. Like if you're getting dragged along the sea bottom and you know, you're hitting the rocks, like it's a very visceral experience, you know. So you know, that's the path that we've been on for the last 5 years. I mean, I still think property is a fantastic generational asset. But I think diversification, and you've said at least 3 times in this podcast so far, you know, don't be all in, you know, and I couldn't, you know, if I was to get a tattoo, that's probably what the tattoo would say, you know, is don't be all in all of the time, and don't be in on one asset class. And yeah, I think
but that is okay when you've got something to diversify, but when you're starting out, that's the tough, isn't it? Because you almost got to go all in. But if people go all in on the property side, they go all in. I guess rent to rent is something that people go all in because they're going to, you know, hopefully they can do it with low capital and all that sort of stuff. They're all in on that. So it takes a while then to sort of get to whatever the next bit is. So it's easier for us that have been around for a while to diversify. You can diversify when you've got something, but when you've got nothing, that's hard. So so there is an element you've got to go all in sometimes, but you know, it's a case of just be mindful when you are scaling. I think is a dangerous time, you know, and you know, and when you're diversifying, because you know, whatever subject that somebody is well versed in, you know, that's great. They'll know what they're well versed in. They'll consider, well, it's obvious, isn't it? But that's only because you know. Somebody else coming in that doesn't know your subject, whether it be law, property, you know, electrics, whatever it might be, you know, what you think is obvious to those other people isn't. So that's where you get caught out. So diversification is again, it's you know, it's a tricky thing, and scaling is where we see people really come, you know, what they jeopardize everything they've already got. You know, and then they come unstuck because they're scaling. It might even be in the same sector like property. They're going to go from, I don't know, they're going to go from building 2 houses to building 20. Wow, is it the same? No. Yes and no. 90% of it, 95% of it's probably the same. You can build 2 houses, you couldn't build physically 20, but you've got to fund them and exit them. And that's the difference, and that's the kit. You know?
This is a beautiful segue into where I want to go next, Richard. So thank you for that. I think just on the diversification point, I totally agree with you. I think first 5 years in any business of any description, like you are all in. You know, it's like marriage, isn't it? It's marriage and kids and life. You know, you are all in because you have to make it work. I think what I've reflected upon is what has served really well is to have enforced periods of consolidation. So, and I've said this on a previous podcast that, you know, particularly in my case, if I ever think I'm a genius, if I ever think this is amazing, I'm a genius, is to pause for breath and go, okay, let's cool everything off. Let's see how we're doing. Let's look at the numbers again, and have enforced periods of consolidation. I think it's when every year, you know, people are absolutely swinging for the fences year after year after year. You know, with very undercapitalized businesses, no liquid reserves, emotionally spent. You know, that's when the challenge comes.
Absolutely.
Let's transition into kind of, I suppose, the real meat of the conversation that you've kind of alluded to. But I'm going to give you the kind of punchy title for this, Richard, which is like, so why do builders go bust? You know, why you alluded to it there, you know, building 2 houses, building 20 houses. Yes, it's the same methodology, but there is a big difference. So I'm fascinated by this question. Like, why do builders go bust? And I'm being very, very lazy with my terminology. So within builders, I actually mean, you know, developers, investors, all these people in the game. So lazy terminology, to be forgiven for that.
Yeah.
I've wanted to ask this question, Richard, since the day I launched this podcast, because a friend of mine who helped me launch the podcast, we were talking about the podcast, and he said to me, and I said, who would you really want on the podcast? And he said, I think the people who'd be, you know, good to have on the podcast are the people who are in prison. And he was saying it as a joke, right? He was saying it as a joke, but what he really meant, which I got, was like the people who really totally blew up Like they're the people really it'll be interesting to hear from. But unsurprisingly, that's a difficult booking to get. So, but I think because of your visibility in the industry, I think you can probably answer this question for us.
So are you saying, sorry, Paul, are you saying it's the ones the next best are the ones that nearly went to prison?
No,
that's okay. Carry on.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. So with your visibility, you can kind of see. And also, just my inner lawyer has to say this ahead of time. We're not going to comment on any individual circumstances because not for the benefit of the people, of those people, but for the benefit of their creditors, who will be no doubt taking a whole range of legal action. And I don't want anything we say in this podcast to prejudice those people's abilities to get their money back. I wish them to get their money back. So there's legal processes going on. Let's allow those processes to unfold. So let's not comment on individual cases. Apologies for the overly legalistic approach there, but So fine. Richard, why did builders go bust? And can you take this in this order? One, practically speaking, what happens? Because I look at these people standing on stage and they seem very clever. They've had some of them glittering careers in other industries.
Yeah.
How practically do they go bust? Because it's not like they didn't know that unforeseeable things happen. They know that unforeseeable things are going to happen. So how from a practical perspective, what are the catalysts for insolvency? And then secondly, completely distinctly, what is the psychology behind it? You see very, very successful people. I mean, you've alluded to this already in the podcast. You see very, very successful people. They have everything a human being wants. They have everything, more or less. But yet they take that extra step and risk it all. And often in a lot of cases they lose it all. So I'm going to pause for breath because I've taken a long time to ask a simple question. So stage one, practically, why do builders go bust?
I suppose there are a number of reasons, but they overstretch themselves. They probably think they're more capable. I mean, I'm going to keep it down to it doesn't apply to everybody, but I'm going to keep it down to what I would say is the most common factors. They think they're more capable than they are. They have surrounded themselves with people that probably aren't able to disagree with them. So yes people, yes men, or whatever we used to say, and they're lazy in their choice of people that they work with. So they're lazy in their business practices. So because lots of people that we see in the sector, they'll say, if you talk to them, what's your favorite part of the business? And I would say 7 or 8 out of 10 doing the deals. For Christ's sake, people, doing the deals is the easy bit. I'm not saying, I mean, in terms of length of time, it's not easy to actually do a deal and bring home, but it is the easiest part. So what they do is they then go on to the next bit and the next bit and the next deal and the next deal. So they end up with multiple deals and they think, oh, we got 6 deals, 7 deals, 20 deals, 30 deals, 40 deals or whatever. Nobody can touch us. They haven't got the processes. They haven't got the business. They haven't got the business set up either with the processes and or the people that can challenge them. So ego, I guess I would sum that up as ego, and it is mostly men, but not limited to men. Very powerful, I think. So we see people that start off and they work in collaborations, joint ventures, and they may have full business partnerships. Not many of them work over a long period of time, because there's a change of direction, etc. But whilst they're working and you've got somebody to bounce your ideas off and challenge you, then you're strong. But when it becomes a one-horse race, there's one person making all the major decisions. But maybe, as you said, that they present well. So it's the wrong people probably. They present well, they sell themselves well, they sell their schemes well. The amount of investors, we've done a lot of stuff with investors that are losing and lost money and stuff. And what you really want to scream to them and sort of say is, well, you've just been sold, and you've brought it, and really being harsh, most of them deserve it because they're too lazy. Now that is really harsh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I know a lot of people, and I know you know a lot of people, when people lost millions of pounds, you know,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of thousands, and not so
Mm-hmm.
many millions, but some millions, and
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of thousands. But whether it's $1 million or 100,000 or 10 grand, if that's your money,
Mm-hmm.
so like with investors, all in
Mm-hmm.
on one project. You put all your pension on one project and one
Mm-hmm.
one developer, one whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's from an overall point of view, it's a combination, I suppose. It's ego. It's also laziness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to almost. Is it ego that stops you going out and recruiting people that will challenge you?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just laziness because you don't think, or naivety? I mean, I don't know. But over the decades of the people that have gone bust, I would say it's they're deal led,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so that's never a good thing.
Got it. So they're stacking up all these deals in a row, and perhaps under resourced in terms of people, as you've alluded to, and no doubt capital as well. And then talk then about like the very basic mechanics. And one of the kind of rules I have I have a few rules for the podcast. Is 1, don't interrupt the guest. 2, try not to talk about myself. And 3, ask the stupid question, because I've spent a lot of my life not asking the stupid questions because I wanted to look cool. So I'm trying to knock that on the head. So the stupid question is, like what actually goes wrong mechanically in these developments? Like, because so it's not, everybody knows they need a contingency. Everybody knows something unusual is going to happen. They're going to get on the site and suddenly there is something there they didn't anticipate. So we all know that the unforeseen is going to happen. So how come these smart people haven't factored in the buffer or the contingency to weather that storm?
I think it generally is, and it generally comes down to how the deal's been done and the finances of the deal. They wouldn't have done the deal if they hadn't chipped away at their own numbers, and this is where we see I don't know what you'd call it, immoral lending, shall we say. Now it might work, once you've got a deal. It could be anything. It could be a one house, or it could be a plot of land for 10 houses. You send it across. You might go for a broker. It ends up somewhere, and effectively they're going to have a quick look at it, and they're going to say, "Oh, okay, yeah, would we lend on this?" And how quick do they all come back now and say, "Yeah, we'll lend on this"? But how many of those actually come out at the end and they actually do lend? Because they can't make a really, really quick decision on how they'll lend.
Mm-hmm.
But we know how lenders work, and this will probably upset a few people that are in the lending industry. I don't give a shit. I don't care what they put out there. Sorry for the language. But it makes me cross. And I know quite a lot of lenders and people that are high up in lending and all that, and they're nice people. But it's the way the business is. They're not going to tell you, as the newer business or the scaling business, that actually, they're not going to say to you, "Well, we're not quite sure about your development, but we're okay because we're covered, and we'll soon get rid of you if we need to."
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we've seen over the last decade is a lot of new lenders to the development space. And what's been really interesting is they don't know how to handle one when it goes wrong. So they started off lending, and they really intended to lend on the criteria that they said, and we care, and we will help you out, and all that sort of stuff. But they've also found they don't have the expertise either. So we know a number of lenders that have got deals that have gone sour, that they've had to sort of cover off somehow so that it doesn't impact their brand. And they all know that, and anybody in the industry knows that. So so we don't sort of bite, but they're not going to worry that as long as there's a buffer, from their buffer. They don't care about your buffer as long as they've got a buffer. Obviously they want your development to go smoothly because it makes it easier for them. But then ultimately they don't really care, and sometimes they don't know either.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, right, we know, yeah, we do know, but actually that might stop us getting the lending if we're honest about that, or whatever? And how many people say how much something's going to cost? How do you know how much something's going to cost? You don't actually know until it's done, do you? So it has to be reasonable numbers. So you then surround yourself with consultants, should we say, and experts, other experts. I'm going to be blunt here. I don't care either. They're getting their fee. I know there are some that really, really care, but from my own experience of what we've done ourselves, what we continue to do ourselves, and what we see happening to other people, the vast majority of consultants don't give a shit whether your project is successful or not, as long as they get the fee, and as long as they get, these days, as long as they get some pictures, you know, and all that sort of stuff. And you know, they don't want the pictures at the end; they want the pictures of going through. And you know, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a rant, really, but you know, I actually know, you know, quite a lot of people, and we both know some of them that have got into major trouble, and they've gone down, and they've owed investors a lot of money, and investors a lot of. All of those people that I know personally, or have known personally, they're all decent enough people at the start. They just get on the hamster wheel or whatever it is, and then they perhaps start believing in their own immortality, and they start believing their own story, and other people keep telling them how good they are, and you know, and who doesn't respond to a little bit of that, you know, and you just keep going, and people keep investing in them. So if people keep investing in you over a period of time, you're going to say, well, they're investing in us because we're good. So they help build the story. So every time, if I invest £100,000 in you, that somehow is helping you on your business, but it's also making, oh, they feel that this deal or our business is good enough. So that will help, you know, that will push you up a little bit more, you know, and I think it's hard to resist that. So I think from a psychological point of view, there are some scumbags that go out and they're deliberately out there to take money off of people. But I would say a lot of those are in the service aspect of the sector, where they are taking fees on projects that they know, well, that ain't going to work, but I'm going to get my £8,000. So I don't really care. You know, well, that's not necessarily wrong, I suppose. It's business, isn't it? But it's easy to blame the individual, you know, for it all going wrong. But everybody that's part of that process. So when a business goes down, you just as an investor, you can't just sort of say, oh, they've robbed me now. Because every month they were paying you their interest, you know, you didn't care, did you? So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I care now because I'm not getting my money back. And I fully understand that, and that is wrong, that they shouldn't be doing that. But that's the only time they take interest in it. You know, so so it's all part of the, you know, thing. So it's a little bit like saying, you know, when our problems was it Margaret Thatcher that caused all the problems in the 80s and the 90s? Is it Boris Johnson that's caused all the problems that we've got now? No, of course it flipping isn't. It's the whole thing, isn't it? You know, but yeah, some of the individuals that we've known personally, yeah, outwardly got everything, you know, seemingly, but actually, when you look behind there, no, they haven't got everything in life. They might have the cars and the business, but they probably haven't got the family and the support. So, and they haven't, perhaps spiritually or whatever, they might not be, you know, quite where they need to be in order to maintain, you know, what they've built. So, you know, I suppose you learn a lot from where it's gone wrong from people, but also it's looking at sort of people in the industry that sort of say, well, okay, they got it right. What did they do? So people in, you know, from a development point, house building point of view, you can't be a successful house builder without treading on a few people's toes. You can't do that. You know, I expect there's very few businesses where you can't, you know. So I think it's hard to pinpoint, you know, exactly, you know, what are the problems, but I do think we have a collective responsibility. If we are part of a project, for instance, you know, we have a collective responsibility to make sure that we do everything for that project to be successful. But I think there are too many people that don't immerse themselves as much as they probably charge you for.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Very interesting. You say that was a rant. I think it was a valuable. I think that's a valuable download of your experience and wisdom, Richard. I wouldn't call.
It's
I
a bit
wouldn't.
like therapy, this, Paul, isn't it? You know?
Well,
Oh, I'm going to be paying you for this, aren't I?
that's what we're here for, Richard. So then, it is interesting, isn't it? You know, I mean, if we just hover over the subject of obviously investors losing money, and we've had some really desperately tragic stories over the years, really desperately, like at the like lower end, like people who they lose the money and that they have to tell their husband or wife they've lost the money, and it's like, right, okay, let's get divorced then, because they're so angry about the process. And that's like at the lighter end, and then there's the darker end where people just cannot tolerate the loss, and you've alluded to it already. And then we should I did have someone previous on the podcast who kind of gave me some advice as to handle this, so I should probably follow her advice, which is obviously, you've alluded to it on the podcast already, that people do experience suicidal thoughts or even worse during these periods of calamity. And the advice in those circumstances from my previous guest was, you should always talk about what experience you're having. And if you don't feel you can talk to the people around you, the Samaritans are there. You should reach out. You should make contact. Things are never as bad as you think they are, but you have to talk about the experience that you're having. And investors who have lost money, I'll give you an example. A really lovely guy down in London lost 180k. And people listening to the podcast might be so liquid and so well capitalized. They'll say, well, 180k isn't that much. Well, it was everything he had. It was every single bit of savings that him and his wife had. And that is unbelievably difficult to bounce back from on a lot of different levels. They were both full-time employed, demanding jobs. That, if you think about it in energy expender, they will now have to spend several more years at work than they anticipated doing, which isn't part of the plan, is it? Now then, Richard, let's change the pace, let's change the theme. So there's got to be opportunities here, haven't there? There's got to be a positive from this. And one positive I'd like to just kind of articulate with you and get your kind of industry inside track on is this. I know lots of people who feel like they've been priced out of the market to buy their own home at the moment. Someone was sharing, a couple of weeks ago, and they're specifically at a stage of life where it's two people bringing their resources together, probably thinking about starting a family, for example, and they're looking at like the new build market because that fits with their kind of worldview and what they want to do. They don't want to do a refurb. They don't, they want just like a nice new house to start a family. So the question which I was unable to answer, and I'd like you to answer, is if you are at that stage of life, and you are thinking about like buying a new build house for you, your family, what in this market with obviously rising interest rates, we're seeing a lot of these developments, the reduced sticker coming on the window and all the rest of it. Strategically, how would you secure off a developer a keen price for one of their assets? There's obviously different stages in the process, aren't there? So there's the stage of the process where you've got a flat bit of muddy land and you've got a lovely looking brochure, and then you've got the bit of the process where they've popped the sales office up and there's one or two houses up. You've then got the stage where half the houses are built and they're trying to sell the plots. Yeah. And then you've got the end, what I would describe as toward the end of the process, where the whole thing's being built out and they've got that last couple left. So how would you recommend people approach this subject of, buying a new build house? What are the tips, tricks, strategy, hacks that we could work at to help people get on the property ladder during this little window we've got in the next 18 months?
It's going to come down to, unfortunately, how much cash they've actually got. So it's the same old thing. If you've got little cash, then there's little opportunity open to you, because as a developer, if somebody comes to us as a buyer, we're interested in their position. We can empathize with their situation, but we're interested in their cash position and ability to proceed and complete. So, but right now, if somebody has got a sizable deposit, then with the increase in rates and the projected further increase in rates, which are no reason to disagree with, that's going to happen, it's making the market slower. It already slowed down in on the new build sector in many areas. And I know there's always somebody that says, no, not in our area. That's because they probably don't understand quite how it works and what's going on behind the scenes, not necessarily, what it looks like just to pass in the site, as it were. So yeah, approaching the sales office right now, if you've got a sizable deposit, which, so, probably 25% or so, I would imagine, becomes interesting, because they know, well, you're probably going to get a mortgage providing everything else stacks up. Then you can go and make an offer. At the moment, there'll be lots of sites. We've got sites local to us that, they're putting it up the flags. Oh, only 6 remaining. Yeah, well, they probably had, they had 4 last week. They've now got 6 remaining, so that they will take offers. So so any developer will take an offer, at any point. But obviously, if the market's warm, they're not. Then you can give them an offer, they're not necessarily going to accept. And I think what people don't realize, because there are prices put up on new build estates, then you can make an offer. Don't just accept, oh, this is a 409,000 or whatever. Well, or if you can't get the price down, what else can you get added? The incentives. So say we're already seeing the incentives. But for those people that haven't got any cash, then really it's a case of the first homes policy is a good one, which is still new in most areas. So effectively you should be able to buy a property up to a certain value for 70% of the local value. And you do not need a massive deposit for that, but you need to fit the criteria. So what I would say to most people is, if they have been settled in a particular area for probably 3 years or more, just have a look at what the local authority criteria is for first homes, and then start checking out what developments are going to come up with first homes. But a lot of the developments you see built out now were permissioned before the first homes policies came in. In some of the areas we're working in, they still haven't actually got a working first home policy. We're actually working on first home policies with them as we go through, so some of those aren't going to come online for another year, 2 years to be available. So it is hard. So if you are if you are established in an area, I think that's a good idea. Some of the shared ownership schemes as well that some of the housing associations do are reasonable. I've been skeptical about some of them in the past, but as houses become less affordable, then if you want to get on there, because we know that people make a lot of money out of renting on one hand, but on the other hand, there's not much security in renting. I mean, we've been trying to get a rent to own scheme going for 4 years now, trying to get funding for a rent to own scheme, which would solve a lot of the issues. You get long-term surety of rent. But on new builds, well, it can be done on anything. But I think we've been unable to get funding at the right cost. In big enough numbers. So we even the good old Church of England, they're promoting this and promoting that, and we're having certain people saying things about that. So we got to the point, and we could offer 6% return on their money over a period of time, which would enable people to get in and effectively have an option to purchase that house, 5-10 years, whatever it might be, and they'll still be in a reliance on the market to sort of go, sort of stay strong or whatever, for it to work out particularly well for them. But they'll get security of being able to live in a home for however many years, without getting, as long as they pay the rent, sort of thing. And no, that didn't meet their returns that they wanted. We've had discussions with Guinness Foundation and all that, and all these people. Yeah, it's great. They want to do all these good works, and you come up and say, well, okay. We were looking for 3 million just as a pilot. So we've got the properties we can put into it. It's not that, we can buy the properties, whatever, we can put into it, but to try and get a lender to say, oh yeah, we'll give that a go, and we've actually fairly recently had a discussion with the government, which sounds very fancy. Well, I suppose it is fancy in a way, to talk more about that scheme. and what we got down to it. We couldn't talk to the minister, but we're talking to the whatever next one. Oh well, I will mention it to the minister. You're thinking, no, well, no, you won't. And actually, to be fair, you mentioned it to the minister. You don't even understand what we're talking about because you're a politician. You know, I mean, they were a civil servant, but they still weren't expert in the field that we were talking about. And whoever the housing minister is next week or whatever, they ain't going to know it either. You know, I was at a select committee a few weeks ago, and there's some really, really good people on the committee. You know, good, well-meaning members of parliament and all that sort of stuff. And we're talking about planning and the changes to the MPPF and things and permitted development and stuff like that are coming this year. And quite frankly, those people on there, they just don't understand. They don't understand. They ask some fantastic questions. But they're not the questions that you need to be asking. You know, there's nobody that's industry experienced that can actually, they're the people they want in there, because they're the people they just bring to the table every now and then if they want your opinion about something. But it's very, very restricted how you can answer a question and stuff like that. So anyway, that's really has gone off on a tangent. But it is hard. I do think there will be, and this is only my sort of musings really, in a sense, that we are likely to get a change of government or a change of control if we get no overall control. And I think we are going to see something in the housing sector that is going to help. And I'm fairly apolitical really. Well, I am apolitical. I've never really been a fan of any extreme. But I think actually if we were to get a Labour government, I think that's a fantastic opportunity for people to get into some more, not just affordable home ownership, but affordable even affordable renting, I suppose, because I understand, because I talk to a lot of people, as you do, that have got mortgages on properties that they rent out and they've got to increase the rent and all that. I understand that, but that's business. But actually, that's not societal. We're making business decisions, then we should be making societal decisions. To actually, to find affordable. We don't have a shortage of housing. We have a shortage of affordable housing, whether that's people that want to rent or people that want to buy. And there's plenty of people talking in the industry. I wouldn't say it's easy to solve, but it's a lot easier than they make out. But of course, there's too many interested parties probably that own land, and they don't want this and they don't want that, and so we can build houses much cheaper than we build them now. But there will be a lower quality. But what we're doing at the moment is making the cost of building higher. So if the cost of building is higher, then effectively the pricing goes up. So all we're doing now is we're on this path to making the cost even higher. And I sort of think, well, that's not right. So that's why we started getting involved in the rent to own, because it's sort of like, okay, lots of people can't afford to buy their house, as you've said. But actually, the other thing is why do we have this situation where people buy a house and then they have to move up, and then they have to move up because it's financial based? But actually, if you're a young couple or whatever, and you're thinking of maybe having a family, the sort of more traditional route, well, why don't you buy a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house on day one? Because you can't afford it is why you don't do it. But actually, for a lot of people, that would be great. We've got one development where we've actually made the designs so they are easily extendable. So they are going to be built. So they really are. You just tap it on there. You knock through all the structural stuff's already there. You just but of course, from us, that's a cost, because there's no value put on the property. On the end value. But there is no, it'd be great to sort of say to people, look, this is what's coming. But I do think over the next 18 months, 2 years, houses won't be less affordable. I think they will be made more affordable. They won't get any worse. I can't see it getting, we just can't, I don't think the economy is geared in the way that, property prices will still keep increasing, Okay.
And then looking forward to like the rest of this year, then just for you. So what are you focused on for the next 6 months of the year?
Yeah, so pretty much planning. We've got loads of stuff in planning. We've got an appeal, an acquisition, so land. So because of all the problems associated with trying to do a deal, we do our deals fairly simply. We will put our money into your land at our risk, and then when we get consent, if we get consent, we will give you X for your land. But that X is an unknown X because we don't know what it's going to be worth. So we only work with landowners that are happy to take the swings of the market over a period of a year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is. And lots of them are. So our deals are fairly easy to structure. It's a case of, okay, there'll be a minimum value that you'll put on something. So it's much easier to buy land and structure deals for land than it is to buy properties. That's harder because the market is much more rigid. Whereas in land, it isn't. That piece of land for that single plot even could be valued today, but what's it going to be worth next year when you build it? Well, you don't know. So we don't do deals like that because that's mitigating some of the risk. So we'll share the risk with the landowner. But equally share the risk, we share the reward. So for us, it's, we got quite a lot of stuff on there anyway. So it's processing what we've already got. We are now retargeting areas where, because of the changes politically that we've had in local elections and what we're likely to get in a governmental level, we are focusing on different areas now because the whole world of politics and planning and that is fascinating when you understand it. So targeting the right areas to understand where the opportunities are. We have people send us sites that on the face of it, the site's okay, and then we'll look at the local political situation, we'll look at the changes to the MPPF, we'll look at the thing, and that could either strengthen that deal or it just bins it straight away. But what we find is people that don't understand to that degree, they don't understand how you can manage the planning process, if you like. You can't manipulate it, but you can manage it, so you can de-risk it. That it'll work. It might work in a piece of land next to me, but if I looked at a similar piece of land next to you, it might not work, or the other way around. But what you've got is people that are educating themselves, should we say, or being educated to spot opportunity. Well, spotting an opportunity from a land perspective is so easy. It's all out there. It's not hard, but actually it's the next bit that's hard. It's establishing whether it's actually going to get planning on it. So all of our stuff is without planning. But that's where we make the money. That we don't necessarily make the money through a planning uplift. We might do, we look to, but actually we might just make the money on the exit, and that's that's potentially enough. So for us, we had various areas and that, but now we're more focused on collaborations, joint ventures with people that have an interest in a particular area, or they have money or whatever it might be, that we can work together. And so we're still looking for stuff, but we're only looking in certain areas now.
Got you. Got you. Very interesting. And if people haven't listened to the podcast, if they're interested in kind of connecting with you, learning more about what you do, what's the best way of getting them to connect with you? What's the best connection?
I guess probably the easiest thing is through Facebook for myself, I suppose. That's the easiest thing. Well, we have a website, I'm sure, somewhere. We have a number of websites probably, but as you can tell,
you're the wrong person to ask about the role.
Well, no, not even that. It's like, well, actually, it's not a priority for us. So the websites, they're important, and people look at them, so you've got to have them. But our business isn't really focused on that. It's finding those opportunities and having those conversations with people, whether they be landowners, investors, or whatever. And it is only, a lot of the stuff we do now is with people that we met through people that we met 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. And so very little of the stuff that we do and the people that we do it with lives on social media. They got time for it. I mean, they probably would benefit from it. Somebody would talk them into their benefit from it. But we're not selling a service as such, I suppose. I mean, one thing that we always we should build a presence, because if we want to raise money, but then we're really mindful of where we take money from. because, you know, we've got to know those people. We've got to have a relationship. You've got to have an eye to eye thing, because, you know, you will have difficult conversations over a period of 5 or 10 years, you know. You know, and it's much easier once you know somebody. You know, we're not if we were out there just to, you know, I don't know, find money from people that we didn't know, that's a different business, isn't it? And that's not a business we're comfortable with, really. So it's, yeah, it is relationships, I suppose, at the end of the day.
Perfect. So look, I'm gonna put in the show notes. I'm gonna put in your Facebook link, Richard Little 77736. So that's the right one for you. And
probably don't know, didn't know it had a number, but yeah, fine.
That's the one. And for listeners of the podcast, when you go onto Facebook and you find Richard, you'll recognise his fabulous beard that I alluded to at the beginning. Look, all that remains for me to say, Richard, is look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you sharing the kind of level of detail, knowledge, and experience that you've accumulated over the last, as I said, 5 decades in the industry. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's been a pleasure catching up with you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, fantastic. Well, there you have it, everybody. That was Richard Little. To discuss anything in the podcast, please do come and join me at a Property Investor Breakfast, either on Zoom or in person. All the details will be below. Please do like, subscribe, share this podcast and get it out to people. Thank you very much for listening. Speak to you again very soon.